Jeremy Fernandez. Frontline health workers in Murray Bridge, east of Adelaide, have become the first in the country to receive the AstraZeneca vaccine. It was approved for use in Australia in the middle of last month, making it the second vaccine now being rolled out across the country. The AstraZeneca jab needs to be administered in 2 doses, taken 12 weeks apart. 300,000 doses arrived in Australia this week and will be given to frontline health workers and those most at risk over the next few weeks.
This is an historic day for Australia with the first administration of the AstraZeneca vaccine. We know that this is a very important program for our nation, and we are super pleased in South Australia to be the first place in the nation. And this will be administered to frontline workers here in this LHN. 1,000 doses were received yesterday, and within 36 hours of this vaccine being received into South Australia, we're already starting the rollout.
The vaccines are rolling out and the rate of protection against the virus is steadily on the rise, but there's one big question remaining. Can you still transmit COVID-19 once you've been vaccinated? Well, everything is so new in this area that the answer isn't quite clear yet. But here's what the science is telling us so far. First, let's just recap how the vaccines work. The vaccines create special proteins inside our bodies. If you catch coronavirus, those antibodies latch onto the spikes on the virus, preventing it from gaining access to our healthy cells and causing an infection. But does stopping the virus inside our own bodies also stop us passing it on to others? The answer might be found in Israel. The country has been strong on maintaining social distancing and other health measures, but they're also leading the world in the rollout of the vaccine. It's now clear that full immunity is being achieved in 86% of people who've had the vaccine. In these cases, the virus is completely coated with those proteins and neutralised, so it can't enter our healthy cells. The virus particles quickly die inside the body and can't be passed on. That's all resulted in a 49% drop in cases since vaccinations began in Israel in December. So that's great news. But if only 86% of people vaccinated are getting immunity, that means 14% are not. How's that possible? Well, occasionally a virus cell can slip past the goalie. Let's go back inside the body to see what's taking place. When you're vaccinated, most of the virus particles are coated with those proteins and neutralised, but a few aren't. A few make it through to cause an infection. They get inside our cells and replicate. When those new virus particles begin their own hunt around the body, the antibodies get another shot. This time, the vaccine succeeds. That's called effective immunity. The gold standard, though, is sterilising immunity. That's when a vaccination can prevent an infection entirely, every time. The measles vaccine does this, as does the hepatitis vaccine, but they are in the minority. It's very hard to achieve, and at the moment there isn't enough evidence to suggest the COVID vaccines will do this. One of the main reasons for this is to do with where the vaccines are working in our systems. COVID-19 attaches to a protein in our bodies called the angiotensin converting enzyme. That protein is found in 2 places, the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. The current vaccines have only been proven to reduce the virus in the lower respiratory tract. That's a good thing because that's where most of the serious symptoms occur. But the vaccines don't currently have a measurable effect in the upper respiratory tract, specifically our noses and throats. The good news is we don't necessarily need to achieve sterilising immunity to stop COVID-19 in its tracks. We've been in this situation before. This vision from the 1950s shows the residents of Hull in the UK lining up for the polio vaccine.
By noon of the first day, 150,000 people had been vaccinated. Supplies of the vaccine were quickly running out.
And while the polio vaccine doesn't achieve sterilising immunity either, enough people got that vaccine to slow the spread and reduced the severity of disease to a point where it could be brought under control. Just like then, the COVID-19 vaccines rely on enough of us getting the shot to protect ourselves and each other. Herd immunity is one of the main goals in this vaccination rollout, and we're well on our way with people in Australia now receiving the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines. The host of RN's Health Report and the co-host of CoronaCast is Dr. Norman Swan. He joins us now. Dr. Swan, are we where we need to be in this rollout?
Well, not yet. I think it's people should keep two goals in mind when they're thinking of immunisation. One is that you and I will get the Astra vaccine. I will be really pleased to get it. It will turn COVID-19 into the common cold. That's to protect us against severe disease. The Astra vaccine is really good about that. The second objective, which is actually really the first objective, COVID-19 is not going to get into Australia unless it comes through our borders. The total focus should be on our borders. So that's airport workers, airport catering workers, flight crews, hotel quarantine, and their families and households. And there's only one jurisdiction in Australia immunising them, because they're the second line.
So that's New South Wales being the only state to be vaccinating families of those workers
yes,
as well.
That's right, because if those workers get it and it slips through, going back to your presentation on transmission, if it doesn't prevent transmission in some people, it's going to escape into households, and therefore it's captured in those households and doesn't go any further. That's the most common place it's going to be. And that immunisation should be with the Pfizer vaccine.
Is Italy's decision to withhold those 250,000 doses significant in your view, considering the scale of the vaccination rollout here?
I think it's just going to be a blip, because we've got our own vaccine supplies coming from locally produced supplies. So it might delay us a little bit. Remember, we haven't got COVID-19 in the country, therefore we could wait a little bit. The real worry would be, and it could happen, is that they block Pfizer coming into the... Pfizer's being made in Europe. Are they going to block Pfizer coming into the country? Then we've got a problem, because then we're not able to effectively immunise our borders.
This vaccination program is the biggest task of its kind ever undertaken. For the authorities, that means coordinating transportation, storage and actually administering the jab. On top of that, they're also trying to beat the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories that are catching on fast in some areas.
I don't think it's comfortable to get the vaccine, because there is no enough information to understand about vaccine yet.
I hope the process will be easier, like not too much like application, too much like things to do.
Are you willing to get the jab if it's your,
actually not really.
Not
I
really?
probably, yeah, to be honest, I really just will wait for a while, yeah, till any side effects come out.
We're not really concerned about coronavirus. Like, everyone just tells us it affects old people, and that's really the limit to my knowledge on it.
So you're willing to get the jab?
Yeah, I think so.
Are you worried at all?
Big worry, but you have to do that. If otherwise you can't travel around the world, or yeah. Actually, I'm scared, but
So mixed reaction in the community. Associate Professor Sanjaya Senanayake joins us now. He's an infectious diseases specialist at ANU. Dr. Senanayake, thank you for joining us. What are the factors that make some people, particularly those in culturally and linguistically diverse communities, more susceptible to disinformation and conspiracy theories, frankly, about vaccines?
Yes, hi Jeremy. So there are a few reasons. So the first one is, of course, the host country from which they came, where there may have been a more negative attitude to immunisation and low uptake of immunisation overall. So there was a systematic review of childhood immunisation in low and middle income countries, and they found that there were over 800 reasons why people were reluctant to get vaccinated. So that's a lot of reasons, but when they broke them down, about 40% were related to the infrastructure of that country, which therefore isn't relevant to Australia. But about a quarter were for family or community reasons, about a quarter were negative parental attitudes, and about 7% was due to poor communication. And if you look further, delve further into that community and negative parental attitudes, they were finding that female parents, so mothers, were more likely to be poorly educated, be in low income groups, They also found that there was low trust in the vaccine itself and vaccine providers, and also not a great understanding of why the vaccine was needed. There's also accessibility as well. Remember that these are groups who are more likely to be impoverished. They may not have access to a car or public transport easily, so you want to make sure they can get the vaccine. And of course, they may have lost some trust in the Australian government or their state and territory government's approach to COVID, and therefore they may be more reluctant to take up the vaccine, which of course is part of the governmental plan. And language is a big barrier.
To what extent are the medical community and governments aware of this? How much can these factors be overcome? I know you have been on community radio along with other medical professionals trying to reach some of those communities that don't get their information from mainstream sources.
Oh, look, I think it's very important because language is an issue, particularly for older migrants. They arrive in Australia when they're older. It's harder for them to speak English if they come from a non-English speaking background. And the federal government has also created a culturally and linguistically diverse communities COVID-19 health advisory group, which contains about 30 people from different backgrounds who are there to engage with migrants about COVID. And the government is also doing a couple of things. With SBS, they're producing a video which will be in over 60 languages, and with the Migrant Council of Australia doing an animated video which will be in 29 languages. So we just have to get out there, speak to those communities, engage with them, engage with relevant stakeholders, and get good information out there, Jeremy.
Religious concerns are part of the mix about why people are hesitant about taking the vaccine. There's a big role here to be played by leaders of faith groups as well, isn't there?
Oh, look, absolutely. So people in migrant communities respect various political and other leaders, but religious leaders are so important irrespective of what religion they are. And it is important for them to be vocal about the positive aspects about the vaccination. And again, for us as healthcare workers and as governments to engage with those religious leaders so they understand and can communicate the information correctly.
Dr. Sanjaya Sinanayake, good to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
European nations started their vaccination programs back in December, but are progressing much more slowly than other countries. In the meantime, Italy continues to be one of the worst hit, so it's perhaps no surprise that it's now blocked the planned export of 250,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine bound for Australia. Casey Briggs takes a look.
The Italian government's view is that its own citizens need these vaccine doses far more urgently than Australia does, and it's not very hard to see why they'd be of that opinion. These red dots across the map represent every COVID-19 death reported globally yesterday, around 11,000 of them. And more than a third of those 11,000 deaths occurred in Europe. Australia, meanwhile, recorded none and hasn't had a single COVID-19 death in months. The situation in Italy at the moment is that the country is now recording, on average, more than 18,000 infections every single day. Sadly, that trend line is actually heading upward at the moment and has been for a couple of weeks. The country is also recording almost 300 deaths every day on top of the 98,000 we've already seen. In short, Italy really wants these vaccines. The country doesn't have a problem with vaccine orders. It's actually got more than enough doses on order. The problem is in the supply chain. So far, in its vaccination campaign, Italy's administered about 7.9 doses per 100 people, and it equates to about a 2.5% full vaccination rate. The country's just not been able to ramp up, though, as quickly as some of the other big developed countries with serious waves, like the United States and like the United Kingdom. The country's new Prime Minister has vowed to speed up this rollout. Australia, of course, needs to protect its citizens, and our priority in the vaccination campaign has been protecting the people that are most likely to be exposed to the virus, quarantine workers and also healthcare workers. And by doing that, we build and increase and strengthen our national firewall, which by definition helps protect us as well. Remember also that in a couple of weeks' time, there'll be locally produced AstraZeneca vaccines coming off the production line line in Melbourne just for Australia's use. So when you put all that together and you look at the situation overseas, it's not really that hard to see why the European Union would be blocking exports of vaccines to a country like Australia. We are talking, of course, about one of the most valuable products on earth at the moment.
And that's the show for this week. Join us every Friday at this time. Bye for now.
Don't touch that dial. Planet America is coming up in just a few minutes. And Chaz, what's going on? You're on television in a television.
Yes, I've turned into a TV. Hopefully not a TV with COVID. Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
Yes.
Fingers crossed for that. There is some good news on the COVID front in the United States. A huge week, plenty to talk about. Stay with us. Planet America in a couple of minutes.
The top stories on ABC News. The Health Minister insists the national rollout of COVID-19 vaccines won't be affected by a decision to block a shipment of doses to Australia. The Italian government has banned the export of 250,000 doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, arguing Australia is not considered vulnerable. A spokesperson for Greg Hunt says 1 million doses of domestically produced AstraZeneca doses will be delivered from late March. He says the blocked shipment was not factored into Australia's distribution plan for the coming weeks. Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner will lead a review into the workplace culture at Parliament House in Canberra. The review was prompted by an allegation from former ministerial staffer Brittany Higgins, who alleged she was raped in Parliament House 2 years ago. The Finance Minister, Simon Birmingham, who worked with the opposition and crossbench to set up the inquiry, says it's long overdue for Parliament House's treatment of women to change. Sex Discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins says she's confident both sides of politics will work together to fix any issues discussed in the review's final report. The Northern Territory Chief Minister Michael Gunner says the federal government will help the Territory recruit 400 more health staff in order to expand capacity at the Howard Springs Quarantine Centre. Under a new plan announced today, the NT government will take over management of the centre, which will expand to accommodate 2,000 international arrivals a fortnight, up from 850. The Commonwealth was previously managing international arrivals, while the NT government handled domestic hotspots arrivals to the top end. Mr Gunner says the staff required to run the centre will grow to 500 under the new capacity. And the SCG will be filled with thousands of spectators tomorrow night for the first ever COVID-safe Mardi Gras. It's the first time